Good morning, everyone. This is the final exam review for Math 131, Spring 2019. This is definitely the part of the final that you want to review. Make sure you are able to do these by yourself. I'm providing solutions, but it's really important that you are able to do this independently and without the help of a tutor or without the help of these videos. So if you do the final exam or the review for the final exam with these videos, be sure you go back and do the review again with no support. So let's get started. We are adding two fractions together. So I have negative 1/3 and I have positive 3/8. The first thing that we have to do in this situation is we have to find a common denominator. We have to find a common denominator between these two numbers. Okay, and so our first number is 3 and our second number is 8. You can always multiply 3 and 8 together and get 24. The issue with always multiplying them together is sometimes you get too big of a number, and you might be able to do something less than that. In this situation, our common denominator is 24. 3 goes into 24 and 8 goes into 24. 16, 3 doesn't go into 16, 12, 8 doesn't go into 12. So our common denominator is going to be 24. So what I have to do is I have to rewrite both of these fractions in terms of 24. Now, the 1/3 is negative. So go ahead and keep that negative up there in the numerator. That's a super important thing to make a note of, and you don't want to lose your negative. So 3 goes into 24 8 times. So I am looking at how many times, what do I multiply 3 by to get 24? And the answer to that is 8. So now I am going to take 8 and multiply that times the negative 1. So in my numerator, I have negative 1. We're going to do that again. We're going to say what times 8 gives me 24. The answer to that is 3. 8 times 3 gives me 24. So now I'm going to multiply this 3 times 3, and I'm going to have 9. Okay, so then I have negative 8 over 24 plus 9 over 24. I'm going to keep my 24. Negative 8 and positive 9 is positive 1. So this is my answer to number 1. Okay. The next one is adding and subtracting decimals. So what I have here is the number 9. You can also write that as 9.0 minus 8.46. Now, you're not going to have your calculators. So what you have to do with this is you have to be sure that you're lining up your decimal. When you are adding and subtracting decimals, your decimals have to be lined up. So look at this right here. Do you see this? That's what has to be lined up. Now, also look at how on our 9, we only have 1 decimal spot, but on our 8, we have 2. So the other thing that I have to do is I have to go back and I have to put a 0 right here so that all of my decimal spaces are accounted for. At this point, now we can do the subtraction. I can't do 0 minus 6, and then I've got a 0 here. So I've got to go all the way to the 9 and borrow. My 0 here becomes 9, and this becomes 10. So 10 minus 6 is 4. 9 minus 4 is 5. I bring down that decimal, and then 8 minus 8 is 0. So my answer to this is 54 hundredths. So 9 minus 8 and 46 hundredths is 54 hundredths. And that is my final answer. Okay, so number 3, we are multiplying a binomial times a trinomial. Okay, we're multiplying a binomial times a trinomial. So the first thing that I have to do is I have to take 4a and multiply it times every single thing in this trinomial. Okay, so I've got 4a and I am multiplying that times 6a squared. Okay, then I have 4a again, and I am multiplying that times negative a. Okay, then I have 4a, and I am multiplying that times 2. So I have taken 4a and I have multiplied it by 6a squared, negative a, and positive 2. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the 2. So I'm going to have 2 times 6a. Okay, then I'm going to have 2 times negative a. And then I'm going to have 2 times 2. And now I am able to simplify. So I have 4a times 6a squared. 4 times 6 is 24. A times a squared is a to the third. Okay. 4a times negative a, that's 4a times negative 1a. So don't hesitate to put that negative 1 right there. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. A times a is a squared. Okay. Now I have 4a times 2. 4a times 2 is 8a. Okay. Now, I actually made a mistake right here when I was writing these down. I want you to look at this right here, 2 times 6a. That is actually 2 times 6a squared. So when I wrote this down the first time, I should have had a squared right there. So that is 2 times 6a squared. So I just want you to be aware of when I was writing that down, I didn't put the squared. So this is 2 times 6a squared. So I have 12a squared. Okay. Then I have 2 times negative a. Don't hesitate to put that negative 1 right there. So I've got minus 2a. Then I have 2 times 2, which is 4. And now what we're going to do is we're going to combine like terms. I don't have anything else raised to the third power. So my 24a to the third just stays as 24a to the third. Then I have negative 4a squared and 12a squared. Negative 4a squared and 12a squared. When I combine those, I get 8a squared. Next, I have 8a and negative 2a. 8a and negative 2a. So then I am left with 6a. Okay? Then I have a 4 left over. So I just add the 4. And nothing else can be combined with these. There's no, they're all, you don't have any more like terms. They're all different because their exponent is different. Okay. Now, number 4, these are some of the more difficult ones that I was talking about. Number 4 and 5 are a little tricky. So practice, practice, practice number 4 and 5. Practice number 4 and 5. Make sure you can do it completely and totally alone. The first thing that we have to do when we are working with number 4 is we've got to find a least common denominator. And we're not going to multiply that least common denominator by everything like we would if we were solving an equation. What we're going to do is we're going to make everything in terms of that least common denominator. So here, I'm going to start with this variable right here. So I've got an x. So that's going to be part of my LCD. Then I'm going to go right here. There's a 2 that I need to include. And I also need to include that second x. So do you see how I've got 2x squared? That is the same thing as 2 times x times x. Okay? So because of this one, I've already got one of the x's, but I've got to include the other one. So that's going to be times x. Now for our third term, our 4x, that is 2 times x. So we already have one of the 2's accounted for and the x accounted for, but I've got to write that 2 down. So my least common denominator is going to be 2 times x times x. And we're eventually going to write it as 4x squared, Now let's go back to all the numerators. What I'd like you to do next is, you see how I've got 5x minus 3 over 2x squared? I want you to change that minus to a plus, and I want you to move that minus with the numerator. You're going to do the same thing for that minus with the 5. Okay? So, I have 5 over x plus negative 3 over 2 times x plus negative 5 over 2 times x. And it's just easier if we have that broken down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to see what's missing. I'm looking to see what's missing. So here's my common denominator right here. 2 times x. I have an x right here. So that's accounted for. That x is accounted for. I am missing 2's and one more x. That's what I'm missing. Okay? So I have to do the top. I have to do to the top exactly what I do to the bottom to get my common denominator. Now I'm going to look at the next one. And for the next one, I've got a 2 already. I'm going to put a check right there. Then I have an x times an x. And so I'm going to put a check right there and a check right there. So the only thing I'm missing is 1, 2. So I'm going to multiply this times 2. And if I do that to the bottom, I have to do it to the top. Okay? Now, for our last one, we already have a 2 accounted for. So we have a 2 here and a 2 here, 2 here and 2 here. And then we have 1x, okay? But we're missing this x right here. So I've got to multiply the bottom times an x, and if I multiply the bottom times something, I have to do the top. So now every one of our denominators has the same denominator. We have the same denominator. So my denominator here is 4x squared. 4x squared. Now I've got 5 times 2 times 2 times x, and that's going to give me 20x. Okay, for my next one, I've got negative 3 times 2, so that's minus 6. And for my last one, I've got negative 5 times x, and that's minus 5x. I combine like terms in the numerator, and my final answer is 15x minus 6 over 4x squared. Okay, this is one of the harder problems. Okay, practice this one. Practice this one over and over. Practice. That's a hard one. Practice that one. Okay, now number 5 is very, very similar. Very, very similar. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we've got to identify what the LCD is. Okay, we've got to identify my LCD. You are going to be better off if you go ahead and factor this x squared minus 25. So I'm going to rewrite this as 4 over x plus 5 times x minus 5. Okay, x plus 5 times x minus 5. Okay, so I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to go ahead and write both of those down as part of my LCD. So I've got x plus 5, x minus 5. Okay, both of those are part of my LCD. Now, I do not need to do anything with this 4 over x plus 5 times x minus 5. I don't need to multiply the top and bottom by anything because it already has my least common denominator covered. Think about it the same way that we would think about this. If I had 1/6 plus 2/3, my common denominator is going to be 6. For my first one right here, I don't have to change anything because it's already in terms of my common denominator. My second one I would, because it's not in terms of my common denominator. That's what's happening here, okay? We already have our common denominator covered. So I don't have to do anything to this first rational. Now the second rational, I am missing an x minus 5. So this one, I've got to multiply the bottom times x minus 5. And if I multiply the bottom times x minus 5, then I have to multiply the top times x minus 5. Okay? So my common denominator here is x plus 5, x minus 5. Okay? X plus 5, x minus 5. Then I have 4 from my first rational. And from my second rational, I'm going to go ahead and distribute this. So then I have 5x minus 25. My 4 and my negative 25 can combine. So I'm left with 5x minus 21 over x plus 5 times x plus 5 times x minus 5. Okay? And that is my final answer. Okay, the next couple of problems are asking us to factor. And factoring is when we are going to break the problems down into, we're going to look for a GCF, we're going to look for sums and products, we're going to look and see if we can do it by grouping. So that's what's happening here. This particular problem, 6x squared plus x minus 15, we are factoring using the AC method with this particular one. There is no GCF for us to factor out. So what we have to do is we have to multiply the 6 times the negative 15. And when we do that, we get our product. So 6 times negative 15 is our product. So that's negative 90. 6 times negative 15 is negative 90. And our sum is our b value. So our sum is positive 1. So for this problem right now, we're looking for two numbers multiplied together give you negative 90, and added together give us 1. And those two numbers are positive 10 and negative 9. Positive 10 and negative 9 are the two numbers that we're looking for. Positive 10 and negative 9. So because we have an A value that is not 1, we have to go ahead and split our B value. So I'm going to have 6x squared plus 10x minus 9x minus 15. Okay? Now we are going to solve this by grouping. So I've got 2 right here. So I'm asking myself, what comes out of 6x squared and 10x? The answer to that is 2x. So then I'm left with 3x plus 5. Okay. Then I ask myself what comes out of negative 9x minus 15. And what comes out of that is negative 3. Negative 3 comes out of both of those. So then I'm left with 3x plus 5. 3x plus 5. So my final answer here is 2x minus 3 times 3x plus 5. Now, for number 7, there is a very large GCF. So always look for your GCF. There is a GCF that comes out of all of these, and it's a very large GCF. So kind of keep your eye on that. So the first thing we're going to look at is the 32, the 112, and the negative 240. So the number that comes out of all of those is 8. No, it's 16. I'm sorry. 16 comes out of all of those. It's a very large GCF. So that is a good thing to keep in mind, is you've always got to look for your GCF. Then I am looking for my highest or my lowest exponent. What can I take out of every single one of these? And every single one of these has an x to the third in it. Every single one of them. There's x to the fifth, x to the fourth, and x to the third. So I'm going to take out x to the third from every single one of them. Once I do that, I have a trinomial that is much easier to solve. A much easier, or not solve, but a much easier to factor. Okay? So we do have to pay attention to that GCF. That GCF really makes this significantly easier to factor. Okay? So now we're dealing with a trinomial that's 2x squared plus 7x minus 15. So we've got our GCF out, which was 16x to the third, and we're going to leave that alone. Now we're looking at a sum and product. So we're looking at negative 30. So we have 2 times negative 15. That gives us negative 30. And our product is positive 7. So our numbers here are going to be positive 10 and negative 3. 10 times negative 3 gives me negative 30. 10 plus negative 3 gives me 7. Okay? So I've got to remember that my 16x to the third is part of this, but right now I'm focusing on this right here. So I am going to split my 7x. So I've got 2x squared plus 10x minus 3x minus 15. Okay? What comes out of the first two? I've got 2x that comes out of the first two terms, and I'm left with x plus 5. My second two terms, again, a negative 3 comes out. A negative 3 comes out of that. And I am left with x plus 5. Okay, so the answer for my trinomial is 2x minus 3 and x plus 5. But don't forget, we've got to go back and get our GCF because that's part of our answer. So I have 16 x to the third times 2x minus 3 times x plus 5. And this is my final answer right here. Okay? The next one that is 4 terms. So I've got 24xy minus 12x plus 2y minus 1. It's always a good idea to look at that and make sure that there's no GCF. So you're asking yourself, is there a GCF that I can pull out of all of these? And the answer to that is no. There's not a GCF that you can pull out of all of these. So because we have 4 terms, we are going to look at doing this by grouping. And so the first two, I can take out a 12x. I can take out a 12x. Then I am left with 2y minus 1. Okay? Now, the second one appears that there's nothing that we can take out of that. And I would agree, there isn't a number that's common to both 2 and negative 1, and there's not a variable common to 2y and negative 1. So what we are taking out is a plus 1. Okay? 1 times 2y gives me 2y. 1 times negative 1 gives me negative 1. So be careful there. Students forget that right there and they're not sure what to do. So my final answer here is 12x plus 1 times 2y minus 1. Okay?